Alright, for the last few years I've been buying and repairing military surplus diesel generators from the DRMO auction up at Fort Lewis. This unit I have behind me right here is pretty typical of what I get from there. This one's an MEP 004A, 15 kilowatt, 3-phase, 4-cylinder diesel generator. This particular one has an acoustic enclosure on it, which makes it very quiet when it's running. This one right here is missing a few pieces. Definitely hasn't been run for a while. It's got quite a few cobwebs and a good layer of dust all over everything. And I haven't done any repairs or anything to it yet. All I've done is unload it off my trailer and put it in here in my shop. I've had it for several months sitting in here, and it's about time for me to pull it out and run through it and make all the necessary repairs and get it started. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of what needs to be done on it, and we'll take a look at it and see what kind of maintenance and repairs need to be done. Alright, the first order of business is going to be to get this thing out from in the corner of the shop where I got it, out in the middle of the floor where I can have good access to all 4 doors. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and open up all the doors and just take a quick run through of what's inside of the enclosure here and see what we're missing, anything that obviously needs repairs, cut wiring harnesses or anything like that. Okay, now that we got it opened up, we're going to take a quick look at everything, see what we're dealing with here. This particular model has about 2,060 hours on it. It's really not too bad, well before its design overhaul. The gauges look like they're in pretty good shape. A lot of these I get are full of moisture and rust. These ones still have pretty nice white backgrounds, and they don't look like they're in too bad a shape. Looking down in the generator, there's supposed to be a louvered panel that's in place right here in front of this just to keep debris from getting sucked in there. And I happen to have a spare one of those, so we'll go ahead and throw that on there on this generator. And we've also got all of our label plates. They're zip tied for some reason here instead of riveted on the outside of the enclosure, which would be normal. Looks like our convenience outlet's in place. I don't see anything wrong with that. I do notice that we're missing a fuse cover right here. There's no fuse for the warning light panel, which means none of those warning lights are going to work, so we'll have to go ahead and get that replaced. The inside of this door has a little bit of rust on it. It's not rotted through or anything, but definitely been sitting with moisture for a while. I probably won't do any actual metal repairs on that, but I will go ahead and paint some rust converter on there and then repaint the inside there. Yeah, all the generator components actually look like they're in pretty good shape. I don't see any cut wires or obvious damage, nothing melted in the wiring harnesses or anything like that. All the amphenol connectors appear to be pretty tight, and don't see any cut zip ties or anything like that that would indicate anyone's done any damage to this model. Okay, looking at the engine here, we're obviously missing some filter canisters here. This one right here is the final fuel filter. And we've got our moisture separator and our primary fuel filter. All 3 of those canisters are missing. And then we look down at our oil filter. We're missing some of the hoses for that. This is actually an external oil filter, and we're also missing the lid and the spring and all the internal components there. I happen to have spares for all of these, so I'll definitely be able to replace those. And then here we've got our oil pressure switch. This is actually the oil pressure safety switch. It doesn't operate the gauge, but it does cause the generator to shut down if the oil pressure drops too low. This one's actually broken. The whole bottom piece is missing out of that. And I happen to have a spare one of those as well, so we'll go ahead and replace that. And we've got our lower radiator hose here. Typically I see these disconnected for draining. This particular one I can see has a hole in it right here. Looks like rather than disconnecting it, someone just decided to stab it with a knife to drain it. These I've never actually been able to find except used surplus, so we'll have to replace this one with a flex hose. They aren't cheap, so really don't like to see them cut like this, but nothing we can do about it now. Also, the there's actually a fan shroud that's supposed to be right here. It's missing on this particular model. I'll have to dig through my spare parts and see if I can find one, but not 100% necessary on there. It does definitely help airflow in the hotter climates, but I've never seen one of these with an overheating problem, so if I can't locate one, we'll probably just leave it off. Okay, we look down here at our battery compartment, and actually there's the bottom of the oil pressure switch right there. I'll take a look at it. If it's possible, I may actually just repair this one. If it's just the wires that have popped off of it, I may be able to solder things back together and reuse this one. Battery tray is looking pretty rusty. That's pretty typical. Every one of these I've found is pretty nasty looking from battery acid spillage. We have our battery cables here. We don't have the jumper cable that's necessary for crossing over there. And back off here in this corner, I do see there's our fuse cover for the alarm panel on the front, so we probably won't have to replace the whole socket. I'll be able to reuse that one. Now, the door down here actually looks in really good shape. Normally I see the bottom of these doors rusted out pretty bad from the battery acid. This one doesn't appear to have any cancer. It's mostly just surface rust. And over here on this side, looks like we're missing a fuse right here for the alternator, and that's actually probably this fuse that I saw down here in the bottom right here. Yep, so we'll have to replace that fuse, get the alternator to work. Injection pump looks like it's in decent shape. These are actually supposed to have some kind of lock wire on them to keep them from operating and shutting the fuel pump down. This one right here though appears to be locked into place pretty good. I'll have to take a look and find out why that won't move. On these sets it actually doesn't serve any function, so normally this is lock wired back to the back of the pump there. And looks like our fuel cables, or throttle cable's intact. And oil pressure sending unit looks like it's in place, and don't see any obvious problems here. I do see normally the oil drain on these is plumbed to the outside. This one right here is just sitting here loose, and it has a rag stuffed in the end of it. Yeah, it looks like we're also missing our radiator shroud on this side. That's actually the one that is down in the bottom of the tray right here, so we'll be able to put that one back on. And back over to this side of the generator, really not a whole lot to see here. Get a chance to look at the rest of the wiring harness, and again over here really don't see any problems. So alright, just an overall look at the generator. Everything appears to be here on the outside, except for the doghouse on the intake side of the generator. Just like the one that's on the exhaust side, there's supposed to be one right here on the intake side. Just didn't come with it on this particular lot, so I happen to have a spare one of those in my pile of spare parts, so we'll be throwing that on there to make this a complete acoustic enclosure. Alright, I managed to track down an extra fuse holder and fuse for our alarm panel, so I'm going to go ahead and just install that right in here. Alright, now on this one, I've already pulled the intake manifold off and replaced it. I just do that to check and make sure that there's no foreign objects down inside the intake manifold or the head. I didn't do this until just a little while ago. I got a 30 kilowatt generator, and I fired it up and ended up throwing a rod. It turns out there was a loose bolt inside the intake manifold that sucked it into the intake valve and destroyed the engine. So now I always pull the intake manifold off just to make sure there's nothing floating around in there. Alright, we're going to go ahead and pull this radiator hose out of here. Since it's destroyed anyway, we'll just pull it off and throw it out. Save these hose clamps for use on the next hose. Okay, the next thing I like to do is to turn the engine over by hand. Make sure it's not seized up or anything. If it is, there's a number of things I can do to free it up, but it is nice to know before I go pouring oil and new filters and everything in it. It's nice to know whether or not I'm going to be dealing with an engine that's locked up. We'll get our socket, put it on the crank here, and just see if we can get it to turn over. Yeah, this one turns over pretty easily, so be pretty well sure we haven't gotten any water into the cylinders or anything like that. Alright, next we're going to be replacing the fuel and oil filters in their canisters. I dug through my spare parts bin and I had all the canisters and stuff I needed. This is the cap for the oil filter housing right here, and the spring and the filter retainer. Then I have my fuel filter canisters right here and the actual water separator. And then I had a couple of spare hoses for the oil filter. These use standard -AN fittings, so these would be easy to make up from parts from Summit Racing or for Jags or from any of the places that deal in the -AN fittings. But since I have the correct hoses here, we'll just be using those. And then the actual filter elements themselves, a couple of 3540s for the fuel filters, and then the 1004 for the oil filter. Okay, these oil hoses, they've been sitting for quite some time in my toolbox, so just to make sure there's no debris in them that would cause damage to the engine, I'm going to go ahead and flush them out with a little bit of solvent. And then we'll go ahead and install these hoses on the filter assembly here. Okay, now that we got those two oil filter hoses installed, we'll actually go ahead and install the filter itself. I went ahead and wiped out the inside of the filter housing right there. I want to make sure there's no debris that's inside of there. Get our new oil filter here. Okay, we'll wipe this canister lid off, get rid of all the grime that's accumulated while it's been sitting inside of the toolbox. Okay, we've got our new gasket for our oil filter here. And what I like to do is to put just a couple of dabs of silicone on it to hold it into place. You don't absolutely have to do this, but just to fall out of place when you're installing the filter is a pain. So I just put a couple small dabs in a few places around the gasket. That helps prevent oil leaks when you fire the generator up. Okay, and this particular canister is missing a 1/8 inch NPT drain plug, so I got a new plug right here. We'll go ahead and throw that in. All right, I like to put a little bit of oil in the canister before I put the filter in. It may not make a huge difference, but pretty sure it shaves a second or two off the time that you're cranking with no oil pressure, and certainly makes me feel better about starting one of these engines up after it's been sitting for such a long time. You can only fill the housing up about a third of the way with oil. Any more than that, when you put the filter in, it will overflow over the sides. All right, once we got our oil in the housing, we're ready to put our filter in. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and put our fuel filters in. The old gaskets are still up in there, so we need to get those down out of the way. I find it helps with these to spray just a little bit of penetrating oil up inside the gasket filter housing. And it just helps the gaskets go up in there better, and they seem to seal better the first time. Okay, the strainer and water trap assembly just consists of this washable strainer right here and the housing itself. It just has a crown nut on the end with a copper washer. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and thread this piece of all thread in. Okay, and we'll take our fuel filters, put them in their housings. Go ahead and install those. I like to keep the housing moving just a little bit as I'm tightening this up, to keep it from binding up in the base. Just make sure it seats evenly against the gasket. It minimizes the chance for fuel leaks when we turn on the fuel pumps. Okay, I've noticed that the parts for the oil pressure switch that I found in there don't actually go to each other. I don't know why the two pieces that were missing were there in the generator, but these wires right here on this one are the same as these wires here. So we got two halves of two different oil pressure switches, but I'm not going to complain because these are a little hard to come by. So what we're going to do is we'll test this, the actual pressure switch, and make sure it's working. And if it is, then we'll go ahead and clip these wires and solder them onto there, and then we should have one working pressure switch. Okay, I got my test set up right here, and what I'm going to do is apply about 30 pounds of pressure to the pressure switch, and what we hope to see is the ohm meter go from infinite resistance to something close to zero. Okay, while I was testing this switch, it failed the test. I didn't get the resistance I was expecting. If you can see here what I've got on the back of this little micro switch, I didn't notice it before, but this corner is actually broken out of it, and I would assume that's why this was sitting loose down inside the generator. Now this was obviously a bad switch, so I guess what we'll do is toss this one in the trash bin and see if I can locate another one. Okay, I managed to track down another oil pressure switch. This one's not an exact replacement because it's got 1/4 inch NPT fittings instead of 1/8, but I happen to have the necessary fittings to adapt that, so we'll go ahead and throw this one on. Okay, with that oil pressure switch replaced, now we can go ahead and put some oil in here and button this panel up. Obviously I still need to replace that radiator hose, but I don't have one right now, so we'll go ahead and just see if we can get the thing to start. We just won't run it for too long so we don't burn up the water pump seals. Alright, next we're going to replace our batteries. I've got this pair of deep cycle batteries. I just picked these up from Costco. They're fairly inexpensive, and they work pretty well in these generators right here. I've never had a problem with them. So this generator was missing the crossover battery cable, the one that's used to wire the batteries in series. So I just made up this short section right here with some 4-gauge welding cable that I had. It made up quite a few of these. It works pretty good. Okay, we've got our batteries installed, so we'll go ahead and close this panel up and move on to the next one. Okay, over here there's really not much to do. Since I have this radiator shroud, I'm going to just go ahead and install it. The bolts are sitting right here, so you notice our fan belt's in pretty rough looking shape here. I'll go ahead and replace that after I get this generator started and load tested. Okay, we got our shroud on this side. There's really nothing left to do in here as far as maintenance goes. But what we're going to do now is put some fuel inside the generator, and I'll turn on the fuel pumps. And then I'm going to open up the fuel line right at the injection pump, and we're going to let a little bit of fuel flow out of there, just to make sure we're getting clean fuel and I don't see any kind of water or rust particles or anything else that might cause damage to the injection pump. Okay, I put a few gallons of off-highway diesel in the generator, and what we're going to do now is crack the fuel line right here at the injection pump. And now we'll go ahead and turn on the fuel pumps in the generator and wait until we get some clean fuel coming out of this line. While the fuel pumps are running, I'm also going over to the other side and checking the fuel filter housing to make sure we don't have any leaks showing up over there. Okay, we've got fuel in the water trap and both fuel filters, so I should expect to see some coming out here pretty much any time. And there you go, you can see we got some clean fuel running out there right now. Okay, we've got a little bit of diesel spilled in the bottom there, so I'm going to wipe that up before we try cranking the generator over. Alright, I went ahead and grounded the generator set to my shop ground. Just in case it starts up, I definitely don't want to get electrocuted if there's some kind of a fault. But what I'll go ahead and do is just turn the generator over just for a second or two, and then go ahead and check all the filter housings, make sure we don't have any leaks in the oil and fuel filters, and then also the injection pump and injector lines. We don't want any leaks there potentially causing a fire inside the generator. So if it does start, I'll only let it run for a second or two, again for the same reason. So let's go ahead and crank it over and see what we get. And nothing. Looks like we've got to do a little bit of work on the starter and solenoid. Well, it looks like we're going to be spending some more time inside this panel after all. I've actually run into this on a few of these MEP generator sets. The contactor plate inside the solenoid gets corroded and it doesn't make good contact anymore. We can test and find out if the solenoid's bad. The good thing is these solenoids are easy to take apart and repair, so I'm not going to need to run down to the parts store and get one. Try jumping across to the send wire first. Okay, and you can hear that the solenoid was actually moving there, but the starter motor wasn't turning. And so now we're going to jump her across the contacts of the solenoid and see if we can get the starter motor to move. And you can hear it moving there, so definitely what we got going on is a bad solenoid. It shouldn't be too much of a problem. We'll pull this back cap off right here and clean up the contacts and give it another try. Okay, I've got the solenoid pulled apart, and you can see the pieces right here. The plunger is this piece in my hand right here, and then we got the cap right here. You see the contacts in here are corroded pretty badly. The plunger right there is definitely the worst. So we'll just get out some emery cloth and clean these things up, put it back together, and it should work just fine. Alright, we have our solenoid all put back together, and we'll go ahead and try the starter again. And it looks like it's working. The engine actually fired there, so I'm going to go and just check real quick, take a look, make sure I don't have any leaks. And everything looks good, so we'll go ahead and crank the engine over again real quick and see what we get. Okay, sounds like it's going to start. Do one more check here. Everything is looking good. See any leaks on the injection pump side, so we'll go ahead and light it off and see how it runs. Alright, generator obviously started up pretty good. I didn't see any leaks, either oil or fuel leaks on either side of the engine, so don't want to run it for too long because I don't have any water in the radiator right now. I don't want to burn up the water pump, so we'll go ahead and get the exhaust fan on in the shop and clear out some of these fumes. Alright, we've got a running generator now that's producing power. The next step will be to replace that radiator hose and fill it up with water. And once that's done, I'll let it run for a little bit under no load, and we'll put it under a full load and do a full load test for it. A lot of times those load tests turn up problems that you wouldn't otherwise see when you're running the generator just under a light partial load. So, hope you enjoyed watching me bring this piece of military equipment back to life.